So Eric, it looks like we've got critical mass kind of. You kind of want to kick things off and see how your audio is?
You know,
Well, we don't have a.
before we start, just a thought for maybe a future one, is crew versus skipper communication from both sides. Might be kind of fun to talk about what skippers like with their crew, especially someone like Dale, who's very experienced as crew, and obviously a lot of the experienced skippers. But I think that's something that it becomes individual, but it's still kind of neat to hear what works and what doesn't work with people that have been doing it for a while.
So Eric, you want to invite a couple of people to sign up to take the lead on that?
Or since we don't have a scheduled topic for tonight, it's just what do you want to talk about? Perhaps we could talk about that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, it would be interesting to hear from Dale because Charlie has a different style than I have as captain, and so we could learn a lot from the two different styles. And I think Dale's reflection would be good to hear.
I have some observations, and that is, I've been crewing essentially since 2002. It's amazing. I joined as an old middle-aged guy, and now I'm an old guy. I would encourage anybody that would like to learn about sailing to crew. And one of the suggestions from one of the pros in the book says that it would be a good idea for the crew to skipper at least once a year to show the skipper what it's like to be crew on his own boat. And
I've got a good story to when you get done to exemplify that point.
That's I've crewed for an awful lot of guys. I started out with Lightnings, and last week when Dave Birchfeld was talking about trim, I thought it's a shame that there is only one Lightning in the entire club, and John Pelosi owns it. It is rare for him to bring it out, and it has so many go-fasts on it and things to adjust that there are many of the things that Dave were talking about that we really could have gone into more. Anyway, because I wasn't sailing enough on the Lightnings, I was invited by Ray Merrill to sail with the Scott. And I've sailed with a number of skippers in the club with Scots. And Charlie asked me maybe around 2007 or so, after I had sailed with him at least once, but was not regularly sailing with, if I'd be willing to sail with him. And I think it's personalities with regard to Charlie and me, but whatever clicks, clicks. Charlie doesn't like to talk very much, but that doesn't mean that we can't communicate. And there's a whole lot of difference. He doesn't like to see his crew member talk about stuff that is perfectly immaterial to what's going on the boat. Yet observations are very important. And you just have to learn when to keep your mouth shut and when to speak up. Obviously, for a crew, it's a fairly experienced crew, and I guess I could consider myself to be fairly experienced now. The time to make a suggestion is not in the middle of attack. If you don't like that, you're going to have to buy it. By the same token, there's no harm in directing where the wind is. And of course, as a crew member, you're responsible for what's going on outside the boat. We had a terrible crash one time in the midst of the Governor's Cup, from which we recovered and actually won the race. But we had to drop out of the regatta because, of course, we had a damaged boat. It is important to communicate before you even leave the dock. And you need to talk about goals. As I suggested a couple of sessions ago, you need to have your head screwed on, ready to go before you even get out on the water. And some of the things that you need to be aware of are the fact that you don't want to lose the regatta by losing the first race, for instance, by doing something that is absolutely stupid and risky when you've got a whole regatta ahead of you. By the same token, if you're in the last race of a regatta, you got to, figure out what your goal is and who you're going to look out for and who you need. For instance, last year in the Governor's Cup, we entered the last race on Sunday morning, leading by a point. And Charlie was pretty happy about that. And I said, yeah, but I said, we got to beat Dave one more time. And the reason is that he had the tiebreaker. So if we came in one behind him, he would win. There are a lot of things that I can talk about how a crew member learns to do the technical things on the boat. That is determined basically by what the skipper and the crew member decides. For instance, Charlie often likes to run the spinnaker in a major regatta. And he likes me to look out for what's going on around the boat. That, however, leaves him doing a little bit extra work. And so I'll end this sort of diatribe, if you will, by saying that communicating involves a lot before you get involved in the situation.
Yeah, whenever
Okay.
Jolene and I go out together, before we leave the dock, Jolene always says, Eric, don't yell at me today.
Right.
Um,
Well, let me just say one more thing. Charlie and I are going off to a major regatta in 2 weeks. We're going to Fishing Bay for the annual One Design. And Charlie said he would really like to go. And to my surprise, they're running the regatta. They're going to do some social stuff online, I guess, to communicate and so forth. But it's the kind of regatta that is not a local regatta. This is actually the capital districts for the Flying Scots. It's up at Fishing Bay in Virginia, and the big boys sail in it. And so the last time we were out was 4 weeks ago or so on Lake Townsend. And so it's not a matter of don't yell at me, but it's a matter of, I got to be awake for the fact that we're going to get trounced unless we're both doing the best we possibly can.
so my microphone wasn't plugged in and it's now plugged in, so you can probably hear me better. Yes?
I can. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So other crew members who are mostly crew who are on the call, you want to kind of speak up on some of the things that work well for you from a skipper perspective, or any insights you want to share as an active crew member?
This is Scott. I mean, I think having crewed for a lot of boats in the last 3 years or so, the biggest plus, especially not having sailed a lot before that, is skippers talking out loud what they're thinking, sort of a stream of consciousness. And as you pointed out, Dale, before you're going to do a move, sort of saying, okay, here's the situation, here's what I'm thinking, here are the options, I think this. And as I've gotten more experienced, I get to a point where I will challenge sometimes, or say that sounds just right, or why are you proposing that option? And then it goes into, okay, maybe not for that particular move, but what they're looking at several tacks down the road in terms of the competition and where we are in the race and all that kind of stuff. So that sort of, Dale, it doesn't sound like your experience is with a talking skipper so much, but I know with Kurt, when I do it, he's really good about talking out loud as he's thinking through the process, which I think helps him too. Just verbalizing it and saying, I could do this and this. It's almost a stream of consciousness as we go through it. And I learn a lot from that. And sometimes after the race and after we've done all the moves, I'll say, could we have done this, and would it have worked out differently? Until we go through the race afterwards. And again, for me, that's a huge learning experience to understand the thinking.
So I've done quite a bit of sailing on both ends of the boat. The story I was going to tell in response to Dale talking about switching positions, I was on a Santana 35 in San Francisco many, many years ago. I was foredeck, and it seemed like every time we jobbed, especially around a mark, we went from a dead run to a close reach, and I was fighting like hell with the pole. So we were out practicing one day, and I said to the skipper, I said, let me drive. You go up on the foredeck. So he did. So our first jibe, I kind of turned it pretty quick and so he was fighting with the pole. I said, let's do it again. And this time I did a nice slow jibe and held it downwind for a second until he got the pole, and then brought it, and he went, I get it. And after that point, being on foredeck was a whole lot more pleasant. I think being a skipper, if I swap places with the crew, or if I crew on other boats, which I do quite a bit on lots of other boats, I learn more different styles, different techniques, get a perspective of what the crew is going through on that particular boat, ducking the vang, all the strings and things that the crew has to do. A lot more I can say, but I'll let some other people talk for a minute.
So I'll share a fear that I have. For those of you who know me, I've been skippering and crewing for 18, 19 years now. And I am afraid to take the helm of the Tanzer in wind. We had some equipment issues at Lake Townsend last weekend, and the winds were up and gusty and shifty, and Eric asked me to take the helm while he looked at the equipment problem, and I was actually afraid to do so. Now, prior to that, I had asked him if at the end of racing, if we could stay out on the water and I could be at the helm for a while so I could work on overcoming that fear. And we didn't get that far because of the equipment issue. But for those of you who have regular crew, try to think about how comfortable are they if they needed to take the helm. So it was kind of an eye-opener for me that I was actually afraid to take the helm.
That's very
I think
important.
that's because you turtled the Tanzer once.
Well, that's very important. It's one of the main things that drove Stephanie creating the Women on the Water event, is that so many women in particular are crew all the time. And if something happens, a medical issue or an injury, or the skipper falls overboard, the crew's got to be able to get the boat back to pick up the skipper or get the boat in or whatever it might be. So you need at least some familiarity with what it's like to steer the boat. I know that in all boats that I've sailed, as I am in more wind, if I push that envelope, then, if I'm okay, comfortable in 10, but 15 scary, but if I go ahead and push 15 a little bit, then the next time in 15, it's not so bad because I've been there and realized that I can recover from that.
And we don't have a lot of opportunity to sail in the heavy air, partly on the lakes because it tends to be gusty and shifty and we decide we don't go out. But also a lot of the lake sailing is on the lighter air anyway. So that first race at Townsend, we were enjoying the healing of the boat and the level of extreme racing that was taking place. To Alan's point about getting more experience and more comfortable in the heavier air. Annette, you were there that weekend with Marie, correct?
Yeah.
And was it unnerving for Marie or was she comfortable with it?
I think she was actually pretty comfortable with it. I think we all, we both had a really good time. But I have been less in the spring not spring, but winter at Eustis. There was the last race there was a little bit much for me, and I think it was France I was with. We ended up kind of bowing out at the end because we just felt a little insecure. So I know the feeling, and it's a good. I think it's definitely a good point that you want your crew to be competent enough to do the same stuff that you're doing, so that if something happens, you can be okay.
Well, when I sailed with you, Annette, I always appreciated that after the race, I wasn't comfortable. You were the skipper, but after the race was over, you usually let me take the helm, and we were just kind of, drifting around. And so I didn't feel like I was under pressure, but it did give me, some time to just get the feel of the boat. And one other thing I wanted to bring up that both you and Ken do as skipper is positioning on the boat. If you communicate before you go out to the crew where you want them in the boat, both of you did the 1, 2, 3 position. They explained, to me that 1 was the center, kind of the center in the boat by the cockpit, and 2, sort of the side of the boat forward, and then 3 would be, leaning out. And when you wanted, if it was light wind and you wanted the boat flat, you would like either sort of hit me on the shoulder just to kind of, move this way, move that way. And that works good. Even you don't have to even talk. It's just like 1, 2, 3, and then a little tap on the shoulder. And I appreciated that. That's helped me with both of you, crewing with both of you.
Well, thanks. I don't think I can take credit for the 1, 2, 3 thing, but I do remember the shoulder tap.
Oh, I thought.
But that's a great idea. I like the 1, 2, 3 idea. That's very.
Yeah,
good.
it's and we try and communicate that before we leave the dock. So there's not confusion.
Yeah, I can say that I've sailed with John Tapsey and Al Backus, and starting out the first time, they helped me learn how to get in the right position of the boat to get that boat flat. And after a while, I kind of sort of picked up an instinct how to do that without them having to tell me all the time. But I just, you have to be humble out there to take their instructions, especially if you haven't done it for a while. One thing I did like, one thing I did while I joined the club is I really wanted to learn how to fly a spinnaker. And both John and Alan helped me. Well, John really helped me a lot, helped me develop some of that skill, flying the spinnaker. And I still got a lot more to learn probably, but and learning how to, it's on different, even on different thistles, there's different ways. And I mean, they're just different setups, and everybody seems to be customizing their boat just a little bit, maybe. I don't know that's something you have to. You go to crew on another boat. It's almost like a new whole learning experience. You got to get adapted to all their lines and where they're located and what you got to do. So I don't know. I really appreciate the skippers. They can just kind of go over the lines with me and just give me a quick dry run on the where the lines are for the spinnaker and how we're going to pull them and stuff. And we've had trouble before, lines going under the boat and have to stopped and make it up. But these guys didn't get all excited. It's well, they have fun and not. It is a race. We're trying to do a race, but you got to learn. So and it helped me quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with the spinnaker. I still can't quite get it right, and then trying to teach it to somebody is really difficult. We just came across one little trick that might be great for a beginner. The attachment for my spinnaker pole uphaul came off, and so we had to use the spinnaker without the pole, and it actually was so much easier and worked just as well. I think the next time I have new crew or even with Mary Lynn, I think we might just do without the pole at first and worry about the pole later.
It's funny you said that. I was just thinking practicing the spinnaker without the pole is a good way to learn how the spinnaker works. And then when the pole's there, it takes it to the next level.
So my first learning how to fly a spinnaker was with a skipper who didn't like flying a spinnaker. He had a lot of anxiety around it, and he passed that on to his crew naturally, which was kind of a little bit of a setback. So I kind of remember back to those few years where I was trying to learn to fly the spinnaker, and basically that anxiety was being passed down. So as a skipper, if that's one of your sore points in terms of, you're not getting the spinnaker right, it's doing what you want to do, try to not pass that on to your crew member quite so heavily. Especially a new crew member who doesn't really know what's going on yet.
Jolene has mentioned two things that I'd like to comment on. One is fear, and the other is anxiety. And if you can't get comfortable, you're not going to do a good job, and it's going to be more difficult to learn. The other thing is that fear is a good thing. If you all of a sudden find yourself in a lot of wind and you have an inexperienced crew, or vice versa, if you're an experienced crew member with an inexperienced skipper, then you got to figure out whether in fact you want to do what you're doing. And so over time, and because I've crewed so much, I've had the opportunity to grow comfortable in conditions that are kind of hairy. For instance, if you've got a lot of wind and you're flying a spinnaker, going downwind, obviously, and then you try to jibe, you're doing a lot of things that are set up for a catastrophe. And so you got to be able to both communicate and feel comfortable with each other. A situation, and I'm glad Jolene brought this up. If there's a lot of wind, you guys probably shouldn't be out there. And if people are uncomfortable, they should come in or not go out at all. A couple of years ago, I was on the Lightning regatta down at Sarah. And as probably most of you know, Lightning's got 2 crew and a skipper. And it was blowing. And Harold Broadwell, who was John Pelosi's regular crew member, and I was sailing regularly, but not as regularly as Harold was, turned to me one day and he says, "Do you think you could get this boat in if something happened to John?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I could." I didn't feel uncomfortable with that at all. But I think that you need to ask your crew member or your skipper whether they feel uncomfortable in the circumstances. And I think if you don't, then don't do what you're trying to do. And I think that it is, Jolene's point is really well taken. I think if you're uncomfortable and fearful, then you're not going to be able to do a good job. If you're anxiety ridden because the skipper's uptight and his butt is just absolutely carrying on, then, you know, this isn't a fun situation for anybody. And it discourages people from trying to learn a hobby that's pretty intricate. And that's what we've been talking about all these weeks.
But I think one of the issues with the fear is that you're going to capsize. And the reality is, unless it's really stormy or whatever, you're going to capsize, and you can right the boat. There's assistance there in a race. It's, in theory, not as big a deal, other than you obviously aren't going to win the race. But I guess I don't see many people going out there and not practice, but get used to, okay, if we capsize, here's how we right ourselves. Here's how we go through, whether we go in, depending on the type of boat you have and how much water you have and all that sort of thing. And I think that, at least from my perspective as relatively new crew, is always my fear. We've come close a few times to capsize and taking in water, but never actually gone over one, at least when I've been with Kurt and when I've been on some of the other boats as well. So part of it is it's okay to capsize, although it's embarrassing when you do it sometimes. And I don't know whether the fear's from embarrassment versus actual real physical harm.
I think that's true. There are a couple of things that you can learn from capsizing. One is how quiet it is to be on the water. And in fact, even though it seems like you're going real fast, things all of a sudden stop dead when you're there in the water. The other thing is that it helps to have had the experience of capsizing periodically, or being in the water just with the boat periodically, in order to, again, grow comfortable with the situation. When I started with Lightnings with Bob Graves back in 2002, we capsized annually. And it wasn't a planned capsize. Usually what happened was that we got out from under the spinnaker and just went over. And so it was a mess trying to get it up because we didn't have the dagger board or the center board set in such a way as that was easy to recover. But nevertheless, if you're sitting or floating in the water with a boat, it is comforting to realize that you can work things out. And the other thing, of course, is that if you work it out, you get the experience of learning how to right a boat, get the water out of it, and so forth. We talked about annually doing a drill with the Scots. The Scots a terrible boat to capsize because it's a horrible boat to get back over and the water out of. But that doesn't mean that you're going to die. What it means is it's just going to be a whole lot of trouble. But I think that if you're a learning crew, part of learning is the fact that a boat is going to go over periodically. And a good thing to do would be to capsize a boat on purpose and show somebody how to turn it back up. But it's not usually the first thing you teach a brand new crew member.
On that count, at Lake Townsend, all of our classes start off with putting the students into sunfish and have them capsize and learn how to right the boat. Without taking a lesson, you certainly could go rent a sunfish from Lake Townsend, or whether they're small boats, borrow somebody's sunfish or laser, and go out on a moderate wind day and practice capsizing. Talk to the owner before you borrow the boat and say, this is what I'm going to do, and get used to capsizing and riding that boat. All that skill is transferable to larger boats.
Yeah, I agree. I went out and did that after my second year when we hadn't capsized, and I realized part of my fear was you capsize, okay, the steps are all there on YouTube and you can figure it out, but actually doing it and then feeling comfortable that like I'm fine, I'm just wet and whatever is takes some of the anxiety out. The bigger boats and the difficulty in getting the water out is always the big issue in terms of, as you said, Dale, the work involved.
So Dave has joined us. Dave, the topic that we ended up going through based on a question Scott asked at the beginning is the crew's perspective of starting to crew and the kinds of observations they have from the various skippers and such. And then the skippers kind of sharing a little bit how they introduced new crew. And Dave, I know you had talked about that 1 or 2 sessions ago in terms of the fine adjustments and how you communicate to a crew member to just move the line a very, very little bit. I know some skippers have lines marked on their sheets, Sharpie lines and such, that they'll instruct the crews to adjust to. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So far, most of the conversation has been the crew members speaking up. Ray, on your end, one of your mottos is you got to always be having fun. And you want to kind of just share a little bit some of the things as a skipper you try to make sure take place so that you're having fun and you do take a lot of new crew out all the time. Your new crew has fun.
Well, there's a big difference. Since I had a lot of administrative things to do over the years, I almost always worked with new crew. And you learn a lot of lessons with new crew and how to set the boat up. Unlike Charlie, I learned that with new crew and with inexperienced crew, processing verbally, letting them know what I was thinking before I did it, and giving them plenty of notice, and being in kind of the training mode seemed to work best. What I like to do, and a lesson I learned from Joe Brake, first time he crewed for me. You know, you think, Joe Brake, he's captain. Well, he does crew, he does that to train. He came to me and he said, okay, the first time he said, what do you want to get out of this? And that's a lesson. I try to go to new crew or crew that I don't sail with a lot and ask that question first. What do you want to get out of this? And the answers are different. Sometimes people want to be on the water and get back into sailing. And I sail a little bit easier with them, knowing that they just want to get back into it. Some of the high schoolers I sailed with were different. They said, you know, I can remember sailing with Gareth, and he sailed with me the first time. And I looked at him and I said, okay, what'd you think? And did you get what you wanted? And he said, yeah, but when are we going to come in number 1? Much different attitude with crew. And for me, having fun is getting along well with the crew and having a good time sailing. I had a discussion with Charlie, must be a year and a half or 2 years ago now, and we were both particularly frustrated. I was frustrated because I couldn't beat him, and he was getting frustrated because somebody else was beating him. And we both decided that the problem was us. And the problem was we were trying too hard to win and not trying to enjoy what we were doing to sail. And when we stopped trying to do better and when we started to enjoy sailing, we remembered what we had learned, and we actually both got much better. We actually really did get much better. I know when I sailed with Dale, I was trying to do real well, and I felt so bad that we didn't do as well as Dale would like to do because he's so competitive. There's lots of lessons and all that. So I asked my crew, what do you want to get out of this? And that's the start. Go ahead, Julie.
I think there's a definite performance level that competitive sailors get to where they're not getting better until they kind of step back and say, wait a minute, this has to continue to be fun. And when they figure out that they weren't having fun because they're so caught up with getting better, and to step back and go back and say, what do I need to do to have fun? Then they immediately start getting better in a different way. I've seen that in several sailors.
Yeah. And so where I am in my sailing career is I like taking new people out. I like to see them have fun. I try to find out what makes them have a good time. And then, I come to sailing with the skill of being a teacher and being a provider. And so I'm always thinking, what can I do to help my crew understand and enjoy sailing better? Because I know we'll sail better and they'll enjoy it more. And that's different for everybody I sail with. So I'm trying to communicate. I'm trying to connect with the crew I've got on board that day. Some people want to go easy. Some people want to go hard. And I'm to the point in my sailing career where I can go both ways. And I also did one other thing with my boat that makes it a lot easier for new people. I rigged it. I've rigged the boat so that a lot of things are easy. When we talk about things, how can you make things easier for new crew? I'm not going to go into detail, but I have that on my mind. I have tried to rig my boat so that it sails competitively, but it's also easy for crew. It's easy when we do the spinnaker. It's easy when we do the pole for the spinnaker. For me on my Scott, when I have new crew, I think the spinnaker is the hardest, the mechanics of the spinnaker are the hardest part to get. And so I want to make that as easy as possible because sailing without the spinnaker in a decent wind is not competitive. And yet sailing with it when the crew is afraid of the spinnaker is even worse. So I try to make things easy. Back to you, Julie.
I think, Ray, to chime in there, and I've learned a lot from you when I've sailed with you, which is great because you talk out loud, which I like in terms of what you're thinking. But one of the things Kurt and I have tried last year that really helped me get as a crew to get a better feel for the boat is playing around with roll tacks and the timing between the two and where you are in the tack. That really, we just played around a lot with it, not necessarily during races, but before or after races to get a feel for that. And that was kind of a neat way to sort of understand positioning of bodies and what the boat does and how to increase your efficiency.
That's all about practice. When I go out, I'm at the helm with crew, new crew or experienced crew who hasn't sailed with me in a while. I use my son, Mark, as an example. What we practice is we just go through the drill. We go through the basics because we haven't been together in a while. We go through tacking. And when I go out with new crew, just to let you know what I'm thinking is, I'm always thinking about roll tacking my Scott. It's a big semi of a boat. And so it doesn't look like we're roll tacking. But in fact, you're right. It's all about positioning. And for me, it's like a dance. And I try to describe it that way. I want my partner on the boat to be with me and balancing the boat. And so I'm processing, I'm going to take the lead and I want you to follow. And for most of our tacks, I want you to be parallel with me in the boat. And when they realize that, it makes it so much easier because they know where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to do.
So Dave, on your end, you're one of the skippers who will just email out and say, hey, I'm going to be at the lake. Who's available to go out crewing? So you get a lot of possibly different crew members just showing up in a fairly competitive, active boat. You want to comment, Dave, a little bit on how you make things easy for your crew?
Yeah, and I sail with a lot of new people. I sail with in probably the most complex boat in the club by far. And, you know, I mean, I've even sailed with people that have never been on a sailboat before in 15 knots. And we've flown the spinnaker, and it's all about making people comfortable. And it starts with when I'm in the parking lot and rigging the boat, and I'm explaining what everything does, but I tell them, you don't have to know any of this. You don't have to know any of it. If you remember 1% of what I'm telling you, that's more than enough. I'm just explaining it as I rig it. You know, if you have any questions or anything, but it doesn't really matter. I said, when we get on the water, there's basically a couple of things you're going to do. I said, and I walk them through everything. And I've never not been able to fly the spinnaker. And part of that is because, as complicated as my boat is, it's probably much easier on a crew to fly the spinnaker than any other boat in the fleet. And it's just because of the way the boat's rigged. I mean, when we go to launch the spinnaker, what's the crew have to do? He or she has to pull on a line all the way to the end until it's cleated. That's it. That launches the pole. It's already attached to the spinnaker. It's already attached to the mast by pulling one line, but that's because of the way the boat's rigged and the complexity of it. But it makes it real easy for the crew. And they pull on it, and then I hand them the spinnaker sheet, and I say, okay, now trim and watch the edge of the spinnaker, and I'll show them how to watch for the curl. And we'll just sail. I mean, it's easy. They pull one line, I give them the spinnaker sheet, and they do it. But the main thing is all the crap that's on my boat, and anybody that's seen my boat knows it has, you know, a gazillion lines. It's like, that's not theirs. You know, really, it's not theirs. It's like, this is what, now when I get a competitive crew, they're going to be introduced to, you know, a few more things. And even experienced sailors, you know, or they get on the boat and they're like, oh my God, what's going on? It's like, don't worry about it. You know, just here, you do this. And I've had people too where they drive. They're, you know, they've been sailing boats and they drive, and normally the driver does all the little adjustments. And I'll say, no, just you drive the boat and do the mainsail, and I'll take care of everything else. So, and then depending on their comfort level, you add a little bit more, and they get used to the boat, and you add a little bit more. And one thing I'll say, like when we go to jibe on the 505, you know, that's probably the hardest thing to do with the spinnaker, because you've got to unclip the pole from the mast, you've got to unclip it from the spinnaker sheet, you jibe, you got to clip it to the new sheet, you got to push it out, put it on the mast again. When we jibe, all we do is the crew uncleats the pole, boom, lets go of the line, the pole goes flying back onto the boom, we jibe, and then he pulls, because I've got two spinnaker poles, one on each side, and then he pulls the line for the new spinnaker pole. And when you pull the line, it's attached to the spinnaker, it's attached to the mast, and all they have to do is pull the pole out until there's no more line to go, and then I hand them the sheet and they trim on the other side. But, you know, it just depends on the crew. And, you know, one, never, ever, ever, ever yell. I mean, that's to me, that now I might yell at my competition, starboard, or, you know, come up or come up or come up something, but never at the crew, because if they're missing something, it's because, you know, they're nervous and they're looking around, and you start yelling, it just makes them more nervous, and it's going to make the maneuver much worse. So it's like you got to be calm and explain, and you know, it's like, oh, not that line, the one to the right a little bit. Okay, lift your hand, foot. Okay, that one right there. You see the green line? Pull on that. And then, you know, like I said, I have everything calibrated and everything marked, and I'll say trim to this, and I'll show them like on jib trim. You know, trim to this mark, trim to the number 8, because I've got marks on my boat, and then I've got a mark on the jib sheet, and they just match them up. I said, okay, and then we tack. What's your number you're going to? Okay, you're going to 11. Okay, we'll go to 11. And then I'll talk them through little trim after that. Like I say, trim a little. Well, hell, they'll trim 3 inches when I say trim a little. It's like, okay, look what you just did. Okay, trim a little bit, you know, okay. It's like, okay, and like I said, in light air, it'll be 1 click on the ratchet block. And one little click, which is, I don't know how many clicks there are on a ratchet block, 16, 20 in a turn. You know, 1 little click in light air makes a big difference. In heavy air, 1 little click isn't going to do anything. But in light air, it is. But it just, you know, you got to talk to them and stay calm. And, you know, and it's all about having fun. You know, it's about having fun. But anyway, now I will say, when I'm with a crew that's been with me a long time, we may have some yelling going back and forth. In that case, and I will want him to yell at me. You know, if he sees me doing something screwed up, he should yell at me. You know, like, get on it. But normally, you know, and especially in club racing, you got to have fun. And I want to be competitive. I mean, anybody that knows me knows I'm as competitive as anybody. But it's still more important to have fun. And then when you get the new crew, and geez, you come in well in the fleet, they have more fun coming in you know, in a good position too than, you know, just coming in way at the back. But you know, it's all about having a good time. Anyway, that's my approach.
My dad taught me long ago that the skippers that are yelling are probably yelling because they're uncomfortable themselves, and not. So they're like, I don't know what's going on here, so they tend to yell. I definitely try not to yell. I'll tell my crew, I'll tell my students in sailing class, I'm talking loud often because there's a lot of noise out there, or it's an urgency thing. Sometimes it's an urgency. Can you get this? Please get it done now. You know, just that escalates a little bit, but it's not. And then I'll calm it back down. My windmill, things are marked. I've got a little label maker, and I've got all the little cleats labeled so that a new crew can either by the line color or by the label. That's what that is. The windmill has a deck sweeping jib, so I have marks on the deck, and you trim the jib to that point on the deck. It makes it easy. Just a few more things. Everything Dave said is spot on with the newer crew. I'm a lot more laid back and calm with a more experienced crew. And it's like, yeah, you know, let's go and keep the feedback going and help keep me focused on track. And if you see me getting tense, remind me to relax and have fun.
Yeah, Dave, I would agree with you that on your boat, the spinnaker is probably the easiest to set up, assuming you pull the right line on the right side. But one thing I know when I sail with you, and the same thing, Jolene, when I sailed with you on your boat, was I had no experience with a trapeze. And it's sort of like getting up there, and there's so many counterintuitive things that you automatically do. But if you are going to have new crew, when you do have a trapeze and you're going to think you're going to use it, it's really good to sort of walk them through all the counterintuitive things that you need to do to make sure it's working right.
Yeah, and with the trapeze, I find it's funny because I've sailed with people that have never sailed before and they jump on the trapeze and boom, they're out. You don't really have to tell them anything. They just get it and they go out. And I sailed with other people that just, no matter how much coaching or technique or anything I tried, just couldn't get it. And most people fall somewhere in between. The people that go out right away that I found are rock climbers. If anybody's been a rock climber, boom, they're out. And I've sailed with several of them. My wife, Gail, she just went right out. I don't know how the hell she did it. She's not athletic, but somehow it was intuitive to her.
The trapeze is actually more comfortable than being on the boat.
Oh,
so
heck yeah.
When I would trap out as crewing on the Isotope, I was having more fun and more comfortable trapped out than I was being on the trampoline.
Yeah, I'd much prefer, I mean, on my boat, I much prefer to crew than to drive. I'm just not big enough, at least in a competitive sense. Our lake sailing, it's fine, but, you know, regattas and stuff, I'm just not big enough.
The trapeze, though, is not comfortable when you get dunked.
I have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
Little bagging.
So, questions to the skipper, you know, what are some of the most important things a crew member can do? A couple of things that come to my mind is keeping a lookout for other boats, keeping a lookout for the puffs or the noticeable shifts or what the boats in front are doing shift-wise or the boats behind are doing shift-wise. So what would you guys say are some important things that good crew do to improve the performance of the race?
I agree with you, keeping a good lookout and keeping me informed of what they see, especially wind shifts. If they can practice the timing, wind shift is going to be here in 10 seconds or in 5 seconds, and might not be accurate, but as with practice, you get there, and it's like, that's something I work on myself. So, there's a wind shift, and if we anticipate when it's going to be there, we're ready to start hiking when the shift, when the puff hits, rather. Other boats, I like my crew to watch the compass. I have enough going on watching the jib to when I'm steering upwind, particularly if they can tell me, you know, we're +1, +2, -1, -2 from what our median is, and then we talk about the compass as we're going out to the race course, and try to keep that information, that feedback coming up. Well, like you said, Jolene, obviously watching where the competitors are, especially if there's a particular boat that we need to stay ahead of or try to catch. Yeah, that's all. Any feedback at all is always good. Experienced crew on a reach on the windmill, I like them playing the jib, going upwind. It's more cleat the jib and I sail to it. New crew, it's harder. It's always a process of learning how much do I say trim the jib, ease it, trim it, ease it, versus trying to coach them a little bit and let them play with it and be more forgiving with their learning curve on those fine-tuning techniques. Any feedback that they have on the race course, I always appreciate. And if I tell them, if you see a boat that looks like it's coming toward us, tell me. And for myself, I always say thank you. Even if I've been watching that boat for the last 5 minutes, I might not have seen it. So if I say, yes, I've already seen that, then that's going to discourage them from telling me that there's a boat coming our way. So I always thank the crew for any input they give me.
Yeah, I agree, and especially calling boats. And on a boat with a really low boom like mine, the crew can see much better. And then I try to get them to tell me which boat, because they'll say, do you see that boat? It's like, well, I'm looking at one boat. What boat are you looking at? You know, it's like, you know, we got a boat, you know, 10 boat lengths down here coming. Do you see them? And it's like, oh, I didn't see that one. So just trying to coach them to be a little bit more specific about which boat, because sometimes they are hard to see.
Yeah, one of the things I would say,
Thing.
one of the things I would say for the captains, it's really useful. Kurt does this now, is instead of let it out a little, pull it in more, he says, let it out an inch, let it out 2 inches or whatever. And that's visually for the crew. Okay, I can tell an inch when I let out the jib or pull it in more, as opposed to clicks or a little, or again, if you've been sailing with someone for a long time, they know what that translates to, but it's helpful to sort of give them something visual that they can focus on. The other thing I would throw out there too is that I think the crew is really important is the start and the countdown, especially the last 30 seconds, where they're looking at other boats, they're looking at their position, and having someone counting down, especially we count down the last 10 seconds, so he knows exactly where he is and where he needs to be, and doesn't have to be looking at the timer going down or listening to the sounds or looking at the flags.
So for those who want to be better crew or just getting into crew, you do want to have a watch and know how to use it.
I also like my crew to call ley lines going upwind. I'll double check, of course. And Joel, who I sailed with quite a bit, has gotten pretty good at calling the ley line. It's time to tack, and advice on tactics. So what do you think about this? As much as I can get them involved in watching other boats and playing tactics, then that's more input. Unless I have to worry about it, I can just confirm as time goes on that that looks good, or no, I want to hold this tack for a little bit longer. So getting the crew involved as much as I can keeps their interest.
Yeah, I agree. And as far as, I don't know who was talking that was sailing with Kurt, but and it's, I'll say, trim the jib an inch, but an inch in light air is a huge amount of trim. And that's why I say, so we'll trim to the mark. Let's say we've determined that today's mark is 11 or 10 or whatever it is. So you trim to 10, then you're going to make fine adjustments from there every time the changes. It's like you can't see a click. That's why I say, okay, so at 11, I say, okay, trim 2 clicks. That's probably 1/8 of an inch. So it's probably the width of the Sharpie marker on the line. So we do a rough trim to the mark, and then it will be, a fine trim, click, click, let it out of here, okay, trim a click, trim 2 clicks, give me 2 more clicks or whatever it is. But yeah, I think it's important to have marks that you can trim to, especially. But, if I say trim an inch in light air, trimming an inch is like trimming 5 inches in heavy air. So that's why I talk about it.
Yeah, good point.
When I was crewing the skippers would have me watch the telltales on the jib and they let me try to figure out how to trim the jib by watching the telltales, trying to keep them both flat. Is that something that I should be looking at too?
So
on a free leg for sure.
Alan's comment that he would actually cleat the jib in and then sail the boat to what the jib was doing. Alan, that's an upwind approach?
Correct. Going upwind, I tend more often to do that. Even I have trouble holding the jib and keeping it in a place. If it starts easing out, then it's just easier for me to keep the jib in most cases trimmed in. On a free leg, on a reach, play the jib, watch the telltales. I'm driving the boat, especially like a planing leg on a boat that's out planing, but it's a close enough reach that you don't have the spinnaker out. It's keep that jib trimming, and there's you can trim the sail a lot faster as the parent wind moves when you're changing speeds. So if I can sail toward my destination, then the crew keeps the sail trimmed.
Right, exactly. Exactly. If the crew's playing the jib going upwind, the skipper doesn't know what the hell's going on because he's flying to the telltale. He's sailing to the telltale. And if the crew's moving it in and out, you're going all over the place. So you pretty much have to keep the jib set going upwind. That being said, you get a little gust. It'll be, you got to trim 2 clicks. The wind dies, you got to ease 1/8 of an inch or whatever. But for the most part, going upwind, the crew's going to trim and leave it. If the wind didn't change at all, the crew would trim to one spot and leave it, and the skipper drives to the telltales. As soon as you go off the wind, then you're driving to a spot, and you've got to constantly play the jib to keep the telltales flying. And this is true. This is true in the pre-start routine too. It's like you're reaching back and forth. The crew's got to be, unless there's a specific reason you want to luff or you want to over trim, you know, is you're going back and forth. Like, you know, one of the things I like to do is time the line. You know, I want to see how long that line is, how many seconds it takes me to get from one end of the line to the other in both directions. And if the jib isn't trimmed right, you're not going at your full speed, so you don't know what the time is. So that means, you know, because basically you're on a beam reach going back and forth across the line. So the crew has to trim the telltales constantly to keep the boat going at maximum speed to see what the length of the line is. And if you fly, I mean, we usually do upwind, downwind legs, so we very seldom have reaching legs. And on downwind legs, the jib, on some boats, the jib comes down. On other boats, the jib is absolutely secondary. The spinnaker is the most important thing. And if you have a spinnaker up and the jib, if you have a boat where you have both, if you're going to err one way or the other on jib trim, err on having it ease too much. Over trimming the jib with the spinnaker up, that really causes problems and slows you down. But it's like you always take care of the spinnaker first, downwind, and then you take care of the jib. Now, if we're doing an Olympic course, or, you know, which we could do with some PRO, I've done them several times. We have a reaching leg, but for the most part in our club, you know, we're doing wind fluid courses, and so the jib, you know, you're playing it more. You're actually adjusting it more to the telltales pre-start than any other time.
That and going to the offset mark, even though that's a short little bit. You can,
Oh yeah.
Make small gains there. The rule of thumb is follow the tattling telltale. So if the one on the outside is wiggling, you let it out. If the one on the inside is wiggling, you trim it in. Actually, the same is true steering. That if the one on the inside is, if you're steering and going upwind, if the inside one starts to wiggle, you're about to luff, so you pull the tiller towards that telltale and you'll bear away until you got the smooth flow. If the outside one's starting wiggling, you push the tiller to leeward, you head up a little bit until you get the smooth flow and you got them both flowing back. So follow the tattling telltale.
Yep.
All right, we'll do a time check. Any other thoughts to share as it relates to what does the crew member need or bring to the activities?
Beer.
Beer. On the boat, Dave, or just on shore?
No, I don't drink when I'm sailing.
So on shore, be sure to take care of your crew.
Practice if you can. Get out and just go sailing and practice some maneuvers on a day that's not a race day, or if that, you know, before the race or even after the race, before the next day.
So I know the Lake Townsend race weekend in July, that Saturday, there were 2 or 3 Scots that showed up Friday and actually went out and practiced with their crew before the Saturday, because it was basically their first day out all season.
Yep. Time on the water is everything. I mean, really, it really is. It's just time on the water. The more you sail and the more comfortable you are with the boat, the better you're going to do, and the things become automatic. And that's it. So that being said, I sailed in March, the last time we sailed in the winter, and that's been it. So my time on the water has been 0. So I'm be kind of bumbling when I finally get back out there.
So think about what you want to cover next Tuesday. Any volunteers for leading topics, just let us know. There are some items that we want to talk about that Eric doesn't actually have direct experiences, such as crew, because he often sails a single-handed. So just keep that in mind. So anything else before we disconnect? All right, everyone. Take care. Sail fast.